The Metals Company is an explorer of lower impact battery metals from the seafloor with a dual mission. One, supply metals for the global energy transition, and then also trace, recover, and recycle metals to help create a metal commons that can be used in perpetuity. And with me is the Chief Financial Officer, Craig Chesky, to bring us up to date on what's going on with the company, but also with deep sea metal mining. So I guess I'll let you kind of bring me up to date and then we'll dig a little deeper.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And it's great to dig in a little deeper because we've had these conversations, and since we first started chatting on this, there's been a lot that's happened in this industry. TMC specifically, we're happy to have added two board members. One is Steve Jurvetson, who is a former board member of Tesla for a very long time, current board member of SpaceX, and also Brendan May, who's chairman of the Rainforest Alliance in Europe, started Roberts Bridge, and really trying to build bridges with NGOs and the environmental community. But really, beyond even what TMC is doing, a lot of others are catching up. You have headlines from China that they intend to do collection tests in the Clarion-Clipperton zone for nodules as early as next year. Japan just announced within the last week a discovery of 230 million tons of these polymetallic nodules. TMC has a resource of 1.6 billion tons, but we're happy to see new credible partners and countries come to the table. Norway just announced that they've begun allocating their Arctic territorial waters for deep sea exploration. India has extended their exploration contracts. So some of the biggest, most populous and credible industrial countries in the world are making it clear that seafloor resources are a very critical part of the clean transition.
Interesting. So let's back up a little bit and talk about what the Metals Company is doing and exactly what it is you're doing, exactly why, and we'll explain what that is too.
Absolutely. So the Metals Company is a developer of the world's largest estimated resource of battery metals. And we have a resource, both SEC compliant and Canadian compliant, of 1.6 billion tons of these polymetallic nodules. And these nodules sit unattached on top of the seafloor. So it's less about mining and more of a collection exercise, picking up these loose rocks and then sending them up to the vessel waiting on the surface. Importantly, we can collect and process these nodules using existing assets. So it's a very capital light operation, and there's a sufficient amount of nickel, manganese, and cobalt and copper in situ in this resource to electrify every light passenger vehicle in America, or 280 million EVs. So we need big new solutions for the clean transition to get the metals that are going to be necessary to drive this new economy, and these nodules, in our view, represent that best source.
Now, explain a little bit about deep sea mining and what you're doing in terms of what are the misconceptions and how I know you're doing it with as minimal environmental impact as possible.
Definitely, and I think it starts where one has to examine what this is and what this isn't. A lot of people hear deep sea mining and they think of mining on land, but doing that underwater. That's not really what this is. There are other types of deep sea mining that involve drilling and blasting. This is not what TMC is doing. TMC is picking up these rocks, gently lifting them, and they just lay unattached on top of the seafloor. So there is no drilling or digging or blasting. There's no deforestation. There's no tailings produced, and there's nearly zero solid waste. So relative to getting the same ton of metals on land, there have been multiple life cycle analyses that examine what are the impacts of the metal coming from these nodules, and across the board, every impact category measured for nickel and copper, these life cycle assessments have shown that nodules are the lowest impact of any possible source. So if we're going to stack up the relative impacts and examine what some of the trade-offs are versus other types of extraction methods, nodules stack up very, very well.
Yeah. Now, I know recently Tesla shareholders, General Motors shareholders did vote against a proposed moratorium on sourcing EV battery metals from deep sea mining. So what do you think that means for the industry?
I think as this industry gets closer to production, and TMC would be the first in production, targeting end of the first quarter 2026, a lot of brands have stood up and said, you know what, we need new sources of these metals. We're not going to preemptively exclude any large high-grade source that could help us put these vehicles on the road, but not just vehicles, energy infrastructure. If you're talking about renewable energy, storage systems for solar and wind, nuclear power, defense applications, these metals are absolutely critical. So Tesla and GM both had boards who stood up and said, you know what, we're used to analyzing environmental impact statements for land-based sources. We are going to evaluate nodules with the exact same lens, and we're not going to preemptively say no on something that we're now understanding could be a much lower impact. way of getting these metals. So it was a very good show of support from the boards of those companies. And on average, about 90% of the shareholders of Tesla and GM voted to reject that moratorium that would otherwise exclude Seafloor resources.
Yeah. Now, explain a little bit about some of the partnerships that you've got with TMC and the collaborations that you're doing and how that helps business as well as your concern about the environment.
Certainly. Well, the partnerships that we have are very critical for our success. First of all, offshore, our partner Allseas has developed much of the technology to collect these nodules with very low impacts. And they actually devoted a drill ship to our exclusive use for picking up these nodules in our first contract area. We also have a partnership with Pacific Metals of Japan. They have been smelting nickel laterites at their facility for about 60 years. So they know very much what they're doing. And we can process these nodules at their facility with minimal modifications and no CapEx to TMC. But it's not just the partnerships for the production of this material. We formed a lot of partnerships with research scientists and organizations that have lent their expertise to study this. Now, TMC has funded over $200 million worth of environmental studies over the last decade plus. But that's really doing the science to examine what does this environment look like in this abyssal plain of the Pacific Ocean. And there's not much life relative to many other land-based biomes, but understanding what life is there has been very important. And these scientists are free to publish. They put all of this result into peer-reviewed journals, and they're free to say whatever they want. And so far, what they're saying is that these nodules can produce metal at a much lower impact versus land.
And explain a little bit about the macro look at this and how we're going to need these metals for, I mean, it's not just the US, but globally. We're making this transition to renewables. I mean, we're going to have sources like this, right, to be able to meet that demand?
We're going to have many new sources. And in fact, one could say that metals are the new oil. If you could tell the story of 20th century geopolitics through oil, it will be a very similar story for the 21st century in metals. The International Energy Agency in 2021 came out with a groundbreaking report saying we're going to need roughly 5 times more of some of these base metals, such as nickel or cobalt, by 2040 if we're going to hit any of our Paris Agreement climate goals by 2050. Where's that going to come from? These are metal markets that have to quadruple or quintuple in size. Yes, more will come from land-based mining, more will come from recycling, but that same report said that maybe only 10% of primary demand could be satisfied through recycling. Where is the rest going to come from? You can't recycle what you don't yet have. So a new scalable source like polymetallic nodules is frankly a godsend. Just sitting there on the abyssal plain waiting to get picked up. I believe that these nodules are really going to be the key enabler to the clean transition, removing a bottleneck that could otherwise slow down our transition away from fossil fuels.
Interesting. And then just finally, the metals company, here we are middle 2024. I mean, what do you look for the rest of the year?
For the rest of the year, it's going to be a finalization of our environmental impact statement, finalization of our pre-feasibility work, and we're looking forward sometime after the July meeting of the ISA, the regulator, launching our application to go from this exploration phase into commercial production. We also think there are going to be some very interesting headlines in terms of the geopolitical tailwinds that continue to blow for this industry, and perhaps some interesting partnerships along the way as well. So stay tuned on TMC because it's going to be a very eventful summer and rest of the year.
Well, thank you, Craig, for the update. I look forward to the next one.
I as well. Thanks a lot,
Thank you so
Jane.
much.
Appreciate it.